Live from Washington, D.C., this is Transport Topics Newsmakers, the digital interview series that gives you access to candid conversations between industry experts and a veteran reporter. Sponsored by Road Ready. Here's your host, Dan Ronan.
Hello and welcome to our latest edition of Newsmakers from Transport Topics. Our guest today is the U.S. Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. We're pleased that this is the second time the Secretary has joined us here at ttnews.com to discuss transportation policy issues. Before we begin our conversation with the Secretary, I want to tell you that Road Ready is the sponsor for this edition of Newsmakers. So let's take a moment to hear from Road Ready, and then we'll be back with Eugene Malero and our guest, the Secretary of Transportation, after this message.
As the world moves faster, so do commercial fleets. To get better, fleets are getting smarter with data. But when is data too much? Today, fleets are getting overwhelmed and often struggle to put this data to use. Clariant's Technologies understands this challenge all too well. It's why we developed Fusion, the new software platform that's powering Road Ready. Developed by our in-house team of nearly 30 software developers, it's propelling Road Ready further and accelerating the future of fleet management. Fusion is a true IoT platform, so it's scalable. It easily integrates APIs and has no limit to the number of fleets or assets it can manage. It's built for the cloud, so it's secure and efficient. It's designed to adapt to change when fleets grow and as the industry evolves. And most importantly, it contains a powerful brain that makes Road Ready smarter, powerful, secure, scalable, and capable to help Road Ready customers use data effectively and without effort. We know that tomorrow's biggest innovations will be driven by software. That's why we are always looking ahead. Road Ready, smarter connected solutions powered by Fusion from Clariant's Technologies. Because data shouldn't make you work. Data should work for you.
Mr. Secretary, thank you for joining us. There's been a lot of discussion within the trucking issue about the issue of truck parking, and I know that this is an issue that has gotten your attention over at DOT. Can you give us an update on the status of where we're at on funding for programs for ways to increase the number of truck parking spots in the country?
Well, there's a lot here, and you're right. This is a major issue and one that we view not only as a matter of convenience or fluidity, but really as a fundamental safety issue. When I'm talking to drivers, this is one of the biggest, if not the biggest, issues that I hear about. And you have so many drivers who are forced to either park in a place that doesn't make sense, which has a neighborhood impact as well, or they're missing out on time because they are well short of the end of their shift when you do have a safe, convenient parking resource available. So here's what we're doing about it. We actually have a lot of funding, federal funding, that can go to this purpose. In terms of discretionary dollars, just recently I authorized funding going to projects in Florida and in Tennessee, I-4 and I-40 respectively, that are going to directly build new parking spaces. But I also want to emphasize that a lot of formula dollars can go to this, and we're not sure if state departments of transportation, some of them, are fully aware of all of the different opportunities with formula dollars to do that. So we're going to continue supporting the creation of more truck parking, both with the discretionary side and with the funding that's going out through the states. And one other thing I want to mention, there's a real role for technology here too, to make sure that drivers, operators can find parking spaces that are available. And we've seen that technology, for example, Florida has a system that's got a lot of impressive features. I think that was launched actually with federal assistance too. And we want to encourage that development to tie in with what we're doing on the capacity side, to make sure that we make the best use of the truck parking that we do have, but also recognize that we clearly don't have enough, and there needs to be more where that came from.
Eugene?
Mr. Secretary, and thanks again for joining us. To follow up on truck parking, is your expectation that Congress is going to advance a truck parking bill sometime either this year or during this congressional session? And then could you expand on the potential benefits of having access to parking, how that does impact the supply chain?
Well, look, clearly it's a supply chain problem if the people we count on, the truckers who are such an indispensable part of keeping our supply chains going, if they're not safe or not able to park in an area that makes sense. And, even if you're not involved in trucking directly, I think most drivers who spend time on the interstate see where trucks are backed up on a ramp or other places that just show you how this is a problem. This does have the attention of Congress. I think more often than not when I testify on Capitol Hill, there are questions about this. I don't know whether there will be specific legislation. We would certainly welcome more direct attention on this, but then again, I do want to emphasize there's a lot that we can do with the tools that we have. We have the National Coalition addressing truck parking. That was actually launched proactively by DOT, and recently I kicked off a meeting there. Jason's Law, which honors the memory of somebody who lost their life, and that might not have happened if there was better truck parking available. And again, with the existing funding streams we have, and which got a huge lift with President Biden's infrastructure law, right? More funding going into the highway formula dollars and things like infra, which is one of the programs that we've been using to fund truck parking projects. There's a lot we can do. So certainly welcome Congress deciding to do things that are more specific. But what I want to get across here is that a federal program doesn't have to be exclusively about truck parking or named, the truck parking fund for those dollars to go to this purpose, and I think it's a very good purpose to put them toward.
Mr. Secretary, there's an item that came up in the news on late last week, and it concerns the idea of congestion, some sort of a congestion program for Lower Manhattan. I talked to some trucking officials over the weekend. There's a high level of concern about this, especially because they feel as though there's really not being taken into account the issue of ways to accommodate the trucking industry. Grocery stores, restaurants, hospitals, and the like being charged a pretty high fee to go into Lower Manhattan. Any thoughts on that? And since it's coming through your department?
Yeah, so the state of New York passed a law to create this this system for congestion pricing. The idea is that it will help manage congestion in Manhattan and also generate revenue that is going to be programmed for use in transit. There are a lot of cities around the world that have done this, but to my knowledge, this is by far the biggest and first of its kind application at this level of complexity in the U.S. And these are exactly the kind of issues that are going to be important and need to get worked through in terms of any exemptions for drivers depending on their income, how you make sure that commercial drivers and whether you're talking about taxis, Ubers, and Lyfts, or whether you're talking about trucks are implicated. Most of those issues are to be worked out at that state and local level. There is a federal role which is essentially about confirming that they've followed the legal process. There was a determination Friday from Federal Highways that moves their environmental process forward based on all of the public meetings and the comments that they've got. But really our role is to just make sure of that there has been adequate process, and that's the determination that would be recorded with a final finding on that environmental assessment. What you're describing, these policy issues, very important ones, are ones where we respect that state and local role, but we're certainly going to be watching with great interest because this is really the first time something like this has been tried in the U.S.
Eugene?
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, to turn your focus now on the workforce, just a little bit of background. The trucking industry continues to remind people that the industry is short about 80,000 truck drivers. A two-part question for you. You personally, in your capacity as Secretary of Transportation, what would you say to an individual, she or he, contemplating a career as a professional truck driver? Also, what is the department, your transportation department, doing in the near term to recruit and retain truck drivers?
Well, the biggest thing that I want people to hear who are considering this career is that it's a very important career, one that can not only be rewarding, but is vital in terms of keeping our supply chains going. And as you noted, we really need more people to choose that career in order for our economy to be healthy. The other thing I want people to know, whether they're contemplating a career or whether they're in one and deciding what to do next as drivers, is that we are here to make sure we support the quality of life that truckers experience, whether it's the truck parking work that we talked about earlier, or the task force that we have stood up to look at compensation and make sure that we're not locked into these models where truck drivers have their time and effectively their money wasted sometimes at port gates or at warehouses, making sure that we're supporting women considering this career. I remember doing, from time to time, I'll ride along with a truck driver, rode with an extraordinary driver in Illinois who told me about her experiences, how much she loves the career, but also some of the barriers and concerns that affected women in particular in that. So we're pulling together women in trucking leaders to discuss and act on what more we can do. Bottom line is that we have to do a better job as a country, as an economy, retaining the drivers that we have and supporting people who want this career. And just one other thing I want to mention that we're being proactive on, which is supporting the training of veterans. I think about some of the people that I served with in Afghanistan. There were times when we had to drive between Kabul and Bagram on an open highway that was subject to IEDs. Anybody who's had that kind of experience, I've got to think has more than what they need in terms of preparation to begin a career in trucking. And it's not the same kind of service as service in uniform, but it's certainly a way to serve, given how important this is to the economy. So we've got partnerships with community colleges and motor carrier operators to encourage that effort. Teamed up with my friend Patrick Murphy to make an announcement about that last year with the president. And there's more that you're going to see from us in terms of that financial support to help with that training process, because we really want to make it easier and more affordable for veterans and others to launch this potentially great career.
Mr. Secretary, you speak about the contribution that truck drivers and both the men and women make. Right now, there are labor negotiations that are starting out at the ports on the West Coast with the ILWU, and then we've got UPS and another couple of carriers out, also Yellow, negotiating with the Teamsters. What's your level of concern about labor negotiations right now, specifically in the trucking industry and the transportation industry? We avoided a rail strike several months ago, but what's your level of concern about this in trucking?
Well, certainly something we're monitoring, and whether we're talking about the ports or whether we're talking about large trucking operations, we really count on them, and we count on these workers every day. So our main message is for the parties to work through all of the different legitimate issues that are there at the negotiating table. A lot of concerns, not just around things like compensation, but quality of life. Automation has been a theme that you hear in a lot of these labor talks. Now, I'll emphasize that the Railway Safety or the Railway Labor Act is pretty unique in terms of the role that the government had to play last year. And that situation was unique in terms of what the implications of a nationwide shutdown would be. Each of these, as important as they are, each of these is different. And for the most part, we in the department are on the outside, but we are in dialogue with the companies and with the labor leaders to encourage them to work through these issues and get to an outcome where the companies can prosper, and where, importantly, these essential workers who didn't get to come to work on Zoom during the pandemic, who can't just phone it in, who we absolutely depend on in ways that I think Americans realize more than they used to, that those workers have the quality of life and the compensation that they deserve, given how much value they create for these companies and for the American economy.
Mr. Secretary, different topic again, electric vehicles. I've spoken with several organizations, associations, other stakeholders in the commercial transportation space. And a theme that I get is that the specific for trucks, electric vehicles, for lack of a better term, their words, is just not ready for prime time. They acknowledge climate change. They acknowledge the need for zero emissions eventually, but they keep telling me and others, even on Capitol Hill, that just the infrastructure is not there for them to really go all in on electric trucks. I wanted to get your reaction to that.
Well, look, two things are true when we're talking about electrification, whether it's light-duty vehicles, whether it's ports, or whether it's trucks. One thing is it's essential and it has to happen. And the other is that it's not going to be easy, and we need to support the sector in making these transitions that are not going to happen overnight. Not only do we need to make sure that the technology unfolds in the right way, we also have to make sure that that we have the grid to support it. And that's not something that is easy or automatic, but it's also not something that is optional. Look, we're talking about a global automotive sector that is decidedly moving and quickly moving into the electric space. And if the U.S. doesn't lead, someone else will. Certainly in the light duty side, we see ferocious competition from China, for example, and we've got to make sure that we support an American industry that can get ahead of that. Now, there is remarkable work going on in electrification on trucking. I've seen it for myself, ridden in an electric semi, and yet we know that this isn't like commercial light-duty vehicles where you can go to the dealer today and get one of dozens and dozens of models of electric cars. But what we have to do is we really have to keep our foot on the accelerator, pun intended, and make sure that we're meeting our marks. It's not just important as a climate matter, it's really important as a matter of economic security, because again, if we don't lead on this in the US, somebody else will. So we know it's challenging. That's why we're investing so much in making sure that everything from battery supply chains and refining capacity to charging infrastructure gets the support that it needs over the course of this decade that I think really is going to be the decisive decade for these transitions. But we get that it's challenging. We understand that it's complex. And we want to work with all of the different kinds of players across industry, across the sector, to make this a successful transition that benefits the American economy.
Mr. Secretary, we're about halfway through our conversation, and I want to change topics again because there's so many issues on the table. We lost 43,000 plus people last year in traffic accidents in the United States, about 90 a day. It's a terribly high number, and I know that you have expressed a lot of concern about this. There's money in the infrastructure law. What can we do to bring these numbers back down? I know zero is the goal. Maybe that's not realistic, but at least bring the numbers down steadily.
Well, we have to take action on this, and this country ought to be up in arms about the loss of life on our roadways. We would never tolerate anything close to this level of death and injury in any other mode of transportation, railroads, airplanes, you name it. We're talking about more than 100 people losing their lives every single day, to say nothing of the injuries that happen. All of us know people we care about who lost their lives in roadway crashes. And when you look at those numbers, north of 40,000, that's roughly the same as gun violence in this country. So what are we doing about it? Well, first of all, you mentioned the infrastructure law. We're not just urging states and local governments to act, we're funding states and local governments to take action on this, and so many of them are. When we talk about Vision Zero, the idea of advancing toward a state where there are no deaths on the roadways, we understand that's not going to happen overnight. On the other hand, most years, that's how many airline passengers lose their lives in the U.S. on commercial travel. It's zero. And I would also emphasize that there are a lot of communities that have gotten to zero. Not the biggest cities in the country, but not the smallest either. I was able to recognize at the U.S. Conference of Mayors places like Hoboken, Jersey City, Edina, Minnesota, all very different communities of about 50,000 people that have gotten to zero 1 or more years. What's it going to take going forward? Safer vehicles, safer speeds, safer people and drivers, safer roads, and the roadway design is one of the biggest things that we're funding, and a higher standard of emergency care for that post-crash scenario so that fewer injuries become fatalities. Our National Roadway Safety Strategy call for action has led to dozens of partners coming forward, ready to do their part alongside us. We're talking about everybody from industry to local governments, and again, we're doing our part by funding the better road designs and different plans that local communities and states are undertaking in order to save lives. We can't tolerate this level of carnage. That's the only word for it on our roads. Now, if you look at the latest numbers, it appears that the rise we've seen these last few years has leveled off, but we have a lot more work to do to not just stop the rise, but reverse the rise in roadway deaths. That's a big focus for us. And of course, industry has a big role to play, and the safety professionals who are America's truck drivers and operators know how important this is, and they're going to be a big part of leading this progress too.
Eugene?
Mr. Secretary, to follow up on the safety issue, a two-part question. How much of the safety challenge crises is part of the culture of a metropolitan area or a city or a town. Also, how does yourself and other transportation leaders communicate this the celebration of being safety, in a complete streets concept, when going back to that culture that I'm trying to get at, you have places where it's well known in that town that that street is dangerous, that everybody takes it, is accepting that a certain highway is very dangerous. I grew up in New Jersey, and we would just joke, don't drive on this highway, don't drive on that highway. So two-part question, if I can get your take on that.
Yeah, this is one reason why we're following the data a lot. So we've put a lot of tools out there. Unfortunately, because there are so many fatal crashes, we have very good data about when and how they occur. And we have started plotting the dots on a map to give a data-driven version of what you mentioned that every community knows. People say, oh, watch out for that corridor. You take that curve and you see those little homemade memorials, the cross and the wreath on the side of the road. And you know that this is a place where people have lost their lives. We can use that to direct the dollars to where the biggest harms have happened and make the most of funding that, even though it's unprecedented, is of course still limited. We got to put the dollars where they're going to make the biggest difference. But I would also say the culture issue is a national one. Again, if there were any other cause of death this frequent, I think it would be getting much more attention. And so we have a responsibility to pay attention to it, not to wallow in the bad news, but to drive ourselves and each other toward the improvements that are going to make a difference. Because it doesn't have to be this way. You look at a lot of countries that have similar economies and similar density to ours. They have different outcomes on roadway safety. And again, right here in the United States, we want to lift up those communities that have made those commitments, figured out a way, whether it's a whole city or whether it's a certain neighborhood. We're looking for where the results have happened to drive down these crashes in a major way. And where that happens, we want to lift that up, celebrate it, and invite others to follow their lead.
Mr. Secretary, in the implementation of the infrastructure bill, there's a tremendous amount of money for transit, but we're hearing a lot of stories about transit agencies. The system here in the Washington, D.C. area possibly looking at service cuts next year if they don't get more money. Chicago having some problems as well. What's your level of concern about this in terms of, keeping these transit agencies, which help keep cars and some trucks off the road? What's your level of concern about this?
Well, transit is essential to American communities, and it's important not just for the riders who count on it every day, but for anybody who uses the roads, because even if you don't use transit, you're better off when other people do in terms of congestion. So it really is something that gets maybe not enough credit for how important it is both to those who use it and those who don't. Transit agencies are still under a lot of pressure, largely because commuting patterns have not fully stabilized in the recovery from the pandemic. And frankly, I think we're still a ways out from seeing what the new normal will be. But what we do know is that in the future, transit's going to be important, just like it's been important in the past. And because of new technologies and ways to optimize transit, we have possibilities that we didn't used to have in the past. I'm thinking especially about smaller and mid-sized communities that maybe don't have the density that supports a traditional hub and spoke system with 40-feet buses going everywhere, but could have a ride-share style technology applied to a transit purpose that would save taxpayer money and also get people where they need to be. The bigger cities also, we need to make sure that we are supporting them. We're doing that with everything from the capital investment grants funding going to places like Chicago and New York to making transit more accessible to people with disabilities. We need to make sure that we get a virtuous loop going where you got more ridership means more revenue, more support, and more perceived safety in ways that then lead to better service and more ridership for the future. And there are flexibilities in the budget that we're putting forward right now on Capitol Hill to help transit agencies weather the current circumstances they're in and get to the other side where I do think there can be a better future for everybody.
So it sounds like you're against service cuts at any cost, no service cuts.
Well, look, certainly there's a risk when you cut service that it could wind up actually leaving some people less likely to turn to transit because it can't meet their needs. But we also recognize that transit leaders are being faced with some tough choices right now. And that's why we're trying to take some of the pressure off that has them considering these cuts in the first place, with both the historic funding for new and better capital for the future and the flexibility that's going to help them operate in the meantime. So we're not telling transit leaders what to do as they face these tough choices. We are trying to have their back and take some of that pressure off.
Eugene?
Mr. Secretary, Congressman Rick Larsen, the top Democrat on the Transportation Committee in the U.S. House of Representatives, when he talks about infrastructure maintenance and the fix it first concept, he points to an idea that he coined called Infrastructure Day, that he believes that every day should be, or he believes in making every day an infrastructure day. Obviously, this is a play on words on Infrastructure Week, but to own infrastructure. My question, that's to preface my question, the IIJA was enacted November 15, 2021. From your perspective, can you share with us one success story from the infrastructure law that you believe embodies that concept of Infrastructure Day?
Well, what I love about the results of this infrastructure law is that people's days will go better whether they realize it or not. When I'm thinking about something like the Portal North Bridge, massive bridge project that's needed to be done for years and years, we were able to break ground on it in New Jersey last year and see how the construction has been progressing. We're talking about a piece of infrastructure that dates back to the Teddy Roosevelt administration, where the workers had to use sledgehammers to align the rails sometimes when the swing bridge didn't line up exactly the way it should, and replacing it outright. Other places, like a small rural community I was in southern Indiana, where a very small port that it really amounts to a single crane is being moved from a floating crane to a land-based one, with about $1.5 million in funding from our ports program. And that's going to make a big difference in that community because it helps them get crude iron, pig iron off of the barges and up to the foundry where a lot of people count on jobs there. So my point is that every day is an infrastructure day for all of us in ways that we think about and ways that we don't. You think about it when you're stuck in traffic or when you're at an airport and you see that airport isn't all that it could be. And maybe you don't think about that when you're pouring a glass of orange juice or turning on a TV that came in through a container port. But all of these things add up into something that we do need to tend to every single day. And as I think about the infrastructure bill and the path and the progress we've been on, look, year one of this administration, pretty much the whole year was about getting that bill passed. And year two was launching the programs that the bill created. 40 new programs just in the Department of Transportation alone, some of which are multi-billion-dollar programs, so a huge lift. Now we're in year three. And if year one was passing the bill and year two was launching the programs, year three is really moving the money. We've now been able to make announcement after announcement, selecting the projects, funding the projects, getting that money going out to the states. And that brings us into the best part of the whole thing, which is seeing the dirt fly. And it's starting to happen this year. It'll happen even more next year. Seeing that physical movement that reflects all of the political movement that we focused on in our first year, getting Republicans and Democrats together to finally put an end to the era of Infrastructure Week coming and going without any results, and make this an infrastructure decade full of infrastructure days that are going to make us all better off.
Mr. Secretary, we probably have time for only one more question, so let me ask you this. In light of the East Palestine, Ohio train derailment back in February, legislation's been introduced in Congress, a Republican, a Democrat, to try and improve rail safety. Is this a good bill? Is the Brown-Vance bill that's moving forward a good bill? Is it going to do the job?
The Norfolk Southern derailment in East Palestine, I think, opened a lot of Americans' eyes to the level and the rate of accidents that have been happening on our railways for years. Down from what it was 10, 20, or 40 years ago, but still, I think, shockingly high compared to what most Americans would expect. This Railway Safety Act would do something about that, and it contains many of the measures that I called for in the wake of what happened in East Palestine. It's not perfect, doesn't have everything that we called for, but the way, at least the version that I saw announced, has many things that would make a big difference for holding the railroads accountable and for just physically making these kinds of disasters less likely to happen. I know even as we speak that there are negotiations going on over exactly how strong that bill will be. I hope it remains strong, that it advances to the floor and that it gets to the president's desk, because as soon as those tools are placed in our hands by Congress, we as a department will take them and use them to make railroads safer in America.
Mr. Secretary, I'm afraid we're out of time, but thank you for joining us. We hope we get a chance to do this again.
Me too, and thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much for being here, sir.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
In closing, we want to thank our sponsor, Road Ready, and we appreciate their fine support. Going forward, we are planning more of these newsmakers in the very near future, and we will have an announcement very soon when that next webcast will be and who our guest will be. I know it will be a great program, and we're very excited about the upcoming announcement. This TT Newsmakers will be available for on-demand viewing. Go to ttnews.com for more information, how you can watch our interview with myself, Eugene Malero, and the Secretary of Transportation, the Honorable Pete Buttigieg. Again, for Eugene Malero, I'm Dan Ronan. We thank you for watching.
Thank you for joining us today. For more information on future episodes, visit ttnews.com. This has been Transport Topics Newsmakers.